Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and S.P.D has to be one of the most interesting seasons of Power Rangers. For some, it's easily their favorite in the franchise, and for others, it's at least top 10 or so. But there's one thing that S.P.D definitely is, discussion worthy, which is why, after some 15,000 requests to do so, we're finally gonna discuss it. This analysis will naturally be a lot more dense than some of my more recent ones because there's just so much to cover, which I'm really excited about and I hope you are too. So, with all that said, let's start digging to uncover how Space Patrol Delta cultivates concepts and characters. Before we tackle the specifics of the two-part season opener, let's set the table a bit and discuss the setting of S.P.D. This season does occur within the Ranger timeline that we know, but in the not-so-distant future, specifically in the year 2025. In this time, an interesting movement has happened on Earth. Alien life forms have started to populate the planet and live among humans, or at least in New Tech City. So, what we see is kind of like Men in Black, except not a secret. And from this setup springs the natural question of, if aliens live here now, how is their treatment different compared to the humans that have always been on Earth? The opening S.P.D narration makes it very clear that New Tech City is a haven for all forms of life, and that the vast majority of Earth's new inhabitants are peaceful, with only 1% causing any serious trouble, which is a very interesting opening statement. Now, let's break down the opening episodes themselves. Before we're introduced to the team, we're given our first look at Emperor Grum, who is casually stripping a planet of all of its resources. That's one hell of an introduction. So, on Earth, 3 of the 5 primary Rangers are training to solid results. We're also introduced to Boom and Kat Manx, both excellent supporting characters that we'll dive deeper into later. After Doggy Kruger, the mentor of this season, learns of Grum's planetary strip-down, he sends the A-Squad Power Rangers to deal with the situation. Bridge senses that something is off with them, which sets up the late-game reveal. You may not know this about me, but I love the idea of hero factories, as I call them. And I think it especially fits into this season because what we have here is essentially a futuristic police academy. And because of that, S.P.D's relationship and interactions with the general public and how they go about administering justice inevitably create social subtext. But before we dive into that, I wanted to discuss why it was such a smart idea to have this team as the B Squad. We've talked plenty about Rangers who don't quite seem to fit the mold, but are chosen anyways. This team is literally a squad of backups, individuals that are, by Kruger's metrics, objectively less suited to be Rangers than their A-Squad counterparts. And it adds up when you think about who they are. All 5 of them have impressive qualities, but also a couple traits or quirks that could be viewed as potentially problematic. I mean, for 2 of them, it was either S.P.D or jail, so not exactly the best start. They're all more than just officers, or cadets, or rangers. They're unique individuals, each with their own clearly defined highs and lows, which makes cultivating the characters that much more interesting. But that starting point is also thematically relevant, so we'll discuss it more when we break down the characters. So the current B Squad has a run-in with Jack and Z. They discover that all 5 of them have powers, which we later learn was no accident. Jack and Z get away, but Z speaks of doing something more than just helping out on the streets. Kruger eventually decides to promote B Squad to active Ranger duty. He speaks with Sky, and I just need to break down how great of a mentor Doggy Kruger proves to be within 2 minutes. He knows his cadets. He knows what they can do. He knows what they've done. So instead of just asking Sky about his motivations, which shouldn't surprise Kruger since he worked with Sky's father, he also asks Sky what he thinks about his team and how they do as leaders. This is a brilliant question because Doggy knows that Sky fancies himself the favorite for the Red Ranger job. So this question was the perfect way to challenge specifically him to see if he was really ready for this. So how does he do?
If I was to appoint Sid as Red Ranger, would you follow her into battle?
Sir, she's a girl.
Huh. Well, that got uncomfortable real fast. In any case, the trio gets their new morphers, and Part 1 ends with Crybots outnumbering the new team. In Part 2, the team finally morphs, but uh-oh, looks like the sky is blue! Ha ha ha! Alright, no more of that. So then, Jack and Z decide to risk arrest by going back to help the Rangers, which naturally leads to their arrest. But Kruger gives them a chance to be part of something bigger. Z doesn't hesitate and picks up the ins and outs of S.P.D very quickly. Jack, on the other hand, needs a bit more convincing, but eventually joins the team as the new Red Ranger. a role that he immediately fails at in the very next episode. An episode that sees Emperor Grum employing the clever tactic of leading the A Squad Rangers away from Earth. This leaves B Squad as the primary Earth defenders, who are currently being led by this guy. But after being stripped of Ranger status, he enlists a callback from the previous episode and helps out anyways. There's a few things regarding Jack's leadership that I just can't get behind, even beyond this episode. But what I really liked was him making amends in the specific way that he did. Earlier in the episode, everyone else ran the obstacle course while he was chilling. To make up for that, he didn't just run the course, he ran it early. That matters, because real Red Rangers, real leaders, should be held to a higher standard. That's why I heavily praise the Great Ones. Hot damn! Sorry, that image always leaves me feeling a bit confused sexually. Anyways, moving on, forget you heard that. And that is why I heavily praise the Great Ones and heavily chastise the terrible ones. With S.P.D, there are too many really good or really great early episodes to properly dive into all of them, but here's why they were all so good. Almost all of said episodes knew to build the team as characters first and foremost. If you can do that early and do it effectively, everything else becomes easier. The two-parter Sam gives us great insight on Z's past and current perspective and why she originally wanted to do something bigger. More so than Jack, she sees herself in those who are most downtrodden, even in a haven society where aliens and humans can attend grade school together. Through her, S.P.D informs us that even now, when race, gender, even species aren't prominent social issues anymore because anyone can do anything, difference and misunderstanding will always pull people apart. Idol gives us a much more complex look into Sky's perspective and how under his tough guise, he has real human struggles. It worked really well to make this plot driven by a friend of his, because Sky isn't exactly a friendly sort, which means the friends he does have are likely few and far between and very close to him, making the dilemma even more affecting compared to someone like Sid, for example, who probably has a ton of friends or had a ton growing up. But to really make the point, let's take a closer look at Abridged. At this point, we all understand that Bridge as a character is a little abnormal. There's a fine line between annoying and interesting, and I think Bridge stays firmly into the realm of interesting. Despite Sky's opinion that Bridge isn't suited to be a leader, this episode proves that even divergent personalities are valuable ones. Bridge is one of those sneaky smart characters that thinks things through, instead of just latching on to what might seem like an easy assumption. And because of his unique perspective, he's able to prove that Hydrax, not T-Top, is the real perpetrator of the bank robbery. Why does this matter? Because this world, this current Earth, is as diverse as it's ever been. Meaning that the old phrase, don't judge a book by its cover, has even more relevance now than in times past, and making generalizations or assumptions without the full allotment of facts is the exact opposite way to go about policing this world. S.P.D only uses the innocent verdict a handful of times, but when they do, it almost always adds a welcome layer of complexity to the proceedings. And speaking of welcome complexity, let's break down the wide variety of characters this season, because they almost all demand discussion, and we'll start with Boom. Boom is important for one very specific reason. He's a hero in his own way. There's plenty of jobs out there that are necessary, but aren't very glamorous, and being a willing tester for the multitude of S.P.D gadgets is invaluable. This guy flamed out of S.P.D, couldn't hack it, but in another amazing Kruger move, he saw his potential and decided to fit him with a job tailored to his skills. This is what Kruger does. He's not just another Ranger mentor. Time and time again, he proves to also be the high point for organizational leadership. Getting back to Boom, it was also really smart to have him be the one that Jack connects to early on. It's because Boom strove so hard to be a cadet, but still found a way to contribute when that doesn't work out, which gives Jack more assurance that S.P.D actually can be trusted. And I loved how the others were open to covering for him when Boom's parents came to visit. It was a pretty funny episode, off the back of a much more dramatic one, but it really allowed Boom to go through his own arc, because even with everything he's accomplished, he still felt the need to keep his true profession from his parents until the very end of the episode. But now they have a better understanding and appreciation for their son, and Boom realizes that he can make them proud even without orange spandex. The Orange Ranger might be made up, but his contributions to the team aren't. And if there's one absolute truth about Power Rangers, it's that any given team is far, far more than the guys and girls on the box art. Boom's character is relevant because if New Tech City really is a haven for everyone that lives there, then those who are genuine and work hard should have a place there, even though we know that system isn't a perfect one. Next, we have Kat Manx, who is essentially second in command at S.P.D. She's also invaluable as a character because she isn't just a science-loving subordinate to Kruger. When the situation demands it, she can and will get up in his face when he's the one out of line. The series implies that they do have a history of working together, giving Kat the role of check and balance for Kruger, which Kruger wisely allows, even if he's not always extremely receptive to it in the moment. Her tech wizardry makes her one of the more useful characters by default. But what I like about her place in all this is one simple thing. Cam, alongside several other franchise geniuses, were often overlooked by their teams despite their invaluable contributions. But Kat is exclusively viewed as invaluable, and never has to go through what at this point would be an obvious hurdle. But she also has her own story, which goes back to how most characters are cultivated this season. When she becomes a one-time ranger, that entire episode is rooted in her past as well as what she sees for her future, and it makes total sense that when she leaves for a new job, things quickly spiral out of control on the home front. But what was great about the setup is how the team, including Doggy, knew that things wouldn't run as smoothly without her, but still put on an act so she wouldn't feel as guilty about her decision, at least before Boom begs her to stay. With Kat, and many of the characters and situations, there is genuine conflict, difficult decisions to make, and no easy answers most of the time, and all that made the season exceptionally more engaging and grounded. Before we talk more about Kruger and the main Rangers, let's discuss the villains, since this time there's actually something to say about them. Emperor Grum starts off as a dangerous and cunning villain, and he's well designed on top of that. But here's where Grum went from okay to legitimately good. He might seem off his rocker while he throws temper tantrums every other scene he's in, but he's conquered entire planets, star systems, galaxies. How? Because behind that unhinged surface level persona is a man with a plan. Here's the thing about villains in Power Rangers. Every season follows the predictable multi-episode format of monster, bigger monster, and then win the day. But good seasons find ways to work around that by either properly advancing the villains as characters, see Jungle Fury, or creating a situation where the heroes can't claim victory overnight because of the nuance of the villain side itself, see In Space. Grum reinvents the game by instead baiting S.P.D into thinking he's just trying to ravage the Earth. This is what he did to Elandria in episode 1, and what he did to Kruger's homeworld of Sirius before that. Life isn't that valuable to him. So Kruger, as well as the rest of S.P.D, have every reason to believe that he's been losing this whole time. However, it's later revealed that his real plan is not to destroy the Earth, but to acquire its resources, to build a body for Omni, the giant brain he worships. That was his real endgame, and it nearly worked. But why not just ravage the Earth, though? Because Grum has a score to settle with Kruger, and he wants this one to be special. That's also why he kept Kruger's wife hostage this whole time to use as leverage when he could have easily killed her. And on top of that, he found a way to convince, not mind wipe, not brain control, convince the A-Squad Rangers, the pinnacle of what S.P.D should represent, to join his side. Grum is so evil and so good at being evil that he convinced the best team Kruger could assemble that his side was the winning side. And again, he did that instead of just destroying them because Grum wants his victory over Kruger to be as poetic as possible. He routinely drains entire planets of their resources, but this time, Kruger was the planet. I know what some of you must be thinking, but then why wasn't Grum at least an honorable mention in your top 10 villains video? The answer? Because I'm not perfect. Mesogog probably should have been higher as well while we're at it. With the other villains, there's not as much to say. You either can stand Mora or you can't, and Broodwing is just a salesman. But with S.P.D, we have another season that does well to tie the hero and the villain side of things together in ways that make the story stronger. And it was a great narrative close to have Grum and Doggy duke it out one last time, with everything else pretty much settled. And what was also great? Grum wanted Kruger to end him, kill him after he lost. Kruger didn't, because S.P.D isn't about revenge or settling scores. It's about justice, which is a perfect transition to the head dog himself. S.P.D started off as an organization in Sirius, but then Grum laid waste to every single member of that race except Doggy and his wife. This is the emotional weight that Kruger has to carry throughout the season, which makes his narrative a modified and expanded version of Magna Defenders, and in both cases, there's an excellent use of internal dilemma and struggle that comes with balancing their horrifying past with their current fight. But at this point, Kruger's been leading Earth's S.P.D for 24 years, so he understands the mission, he understands how to conduct himself most of the time, and most vitally, he understands how to lead. He doesn't just train the B Squad or order them around, he teaches them, which is especially true for Jack and Sky because they had a lot of growing up to do. Despite his at times hardened demeanor, his overall caring outlook represents S.P.D at its highest ideals. An S.P.D that looks beyond the surface and discovers the deeper truth. An S.P.D where justice for all actually means for all. That's what S.P.D is supposed to be. And, for most aliens and humans alike, that's what S.P.D is. But then, why are so many bottom-dwelling aliens so fearful of them? Even the ones that have probably done nothing all that bad. Therein lies the social subtext, and creating that subtext has a lot to do with Sky Tate, or more specifically, Sky Tate's worldview. Sky is a perfect example of an ideal ranger who actually isn't all that ideal. His focus on the rules and what things should be makes him really good to a point, but it also keeps him from seeing the nuance surrounding many of his situations. And that's in addition to his inability to let go of not being the Red Ranger for a fair bit of time. There's a line that Piggy says, and it's just so fitting that Sky is the one to incite it. Piggy is annoyed because S.P.D is always scaring off his customers. Sky scoffs at this, fully convinced that they are the monsters to be feared. Piggy wisely states that to them, S.P.D are the monsters. To them, S.P.D aren't protectors, they're a threat. Regardless of the fact that Sky is the only main character harboring such strict views on low-class otherworldly beings, said beings are prone to fear anyone like him, because for one thing, Sky is definitely not the first one to think this way, and for another thing, aliens have been on Earth for years now, which means they've probably faced plenty of unfair prosecution to this point long before Sky suited up. You don't just wake up one day and magically arrive at 99% alien compliance. Doesn't work that way. There's an entire 24-year history of growing pains that needed to go into this new world order. But it's not just aliens. Sky is also the one most skeptical of Sophie from D-Squad when she turns out to be an android that's done nothing wrong. But because this situation isn't specifically outlined in the rulebook, Sky doesn't quite get it at first. But I don't bring up these points to be overly critical of Sky, because his perspective is necessary, because it's real. Not every ranger daydreams about singing Kumbaya over a campfire with every race, alien, robot, or unusual creature. Sometimes you need to be wary if things seem off to you, if things seem unfamiliar to you. It's human nature. And the one time Sky wasn't wary enough, his former friend nearly got the better of him for it. Also, his dad was killed by an alien, so that's largely informing his perspective on any alien that even looks like they're up to no good, regardless of how justified his perspective is. He brings all this baggage with him, long before he suits up for the first time. He worked hard, struggled mightily, and along the way, lost his major inspiration for joining. All that effort, all those physical, mental, emotional trials, and he's blue. You can see why he's not just guarded with his emotions, but why he's very critical of Jack. It's a great dynamic too, because Sky sees his father as the Red Ranger, and he sees Jack as anything but. And because of this perception, Sky pushes Jack to be better, and Jack eventually answers the call and improves along the way. Both are very imperfect, but eventually, Sky starts to see Jack as a real leader, and Jack starts to see Sky as a necessary second in command. Sky starts off as a terrible character, but then he grows, he learns, and his seemingly clear-cut perception of right and wrong are constantly challenged by the gray areas inherent to many S.P.D missions. Girls can lead a team, albeit badly in this season. Aliens can be innocent, and not all androids will become Skynet if you decide to trust them. But, maybe most crucially, he learns that heroes come in all colors. That's not just a Ranger thing, that's an everything thing. Because Power Rangers as a franchise constantly proves that anyone can be a hero. And fittingly, he learns that last lesson in the aftermath of his most personal and daunting challenge yet, facing his father's murderer. And what a brilliant, detail-oriented episode it was. And Sky getting to finish the job as the Red Ranger, specifically because Jack wanted him to do so, a franchise highlight. There's so much defining that moment too. A son finally coming to terms with his father's death, and being able to finally somewhat let go of that brooding side of his. A Red Ranger who is out of his depths initially, but grows to understand his team, and recognizes what this means to his Blue Ranger. It seems so simple, yet it's so powerful and so perfect. And I'm here to tell you that Reflection is one of the greatest Ranger episodes of all time. If you were to take out most of the season finales, then put it up against the 800 or so remaining episodes, I'd call it top 10. At this point, Sky has more or less finished his arc as a character by coming to terms with his team, his leader, and the world around him. A world far more complex than he ever gave it credit for. A world where the straightforward answer isn't often the right answer. A world where being a Blue Ranger doesn't make you any less of a Ranger. At this point, he was ready to lead. But they still had a mission to finish, so they finished it. Jack made it clear that he wanted a life beyond S.P.D, a fair thing to desire, so he leaves when the mission ends, not while the mission is ongoing like other lesser Rangers have done. Ahem. Anyways, Sky of course passes Kruger's test this time and becomes the new Red Ranger. In addition to his physical attributes, his very high test scores, his unrelenting focus, he now has a more complete understanding of what S.P.D is supposed to be. And we'll talk about the other Rangers, as well as breaking down the series as a whole in part 2. I did say this was going to be a long one, but until then, thanks for watching.